Hello, hello, hello. Welcome into the Fantasy Life Show. We are so excited to have you here. Kendall Valenzuela here with you today, filling in for the one and only Ian Hartitz. But it's still, I don't know, Dwain, it's still a great day to be great because we're going to recap everything you got right, everything you got wrong, and of course the Super Bowl. So I'm having a great time already.
I'm having a great time. You know, normally I've got to hang out with Ian. I get to hang out with someone different. They're letting me out of like my bunker to hang out with someone cool that I used to get to hang out with all the time on SiriusXM. So, I missed hanging out with you because we did the show last year. And just have to give you a quick shout out. You and Ronas, y'all absolutely smashed it. Cooter-doodle, everyone that was at the Super Bowl. If folks haven't had a chance to check that stuff out, they should go over to our YouTube channel and make sure they check some of those things out. Great interviews by you guys.
Oh, thank you. It was so much fun. I didn't want to leave. We were tired at the end of it and we're a little sick now, but that's okay. We got through it. But yeah, all those guys were so cool. We talked with Emmitt Smith. We took a shot on during the show with Emmitt Smith of tequila. I'm sorry to tell you
I'm
that,
so
but
jealous.
it was like the highlight of my life. A shot with Emmitt Smith.
I'm jealous.
Not a lot of people can say that.
I grew up watching Emmitt Smith. Emmitt Smith was the man when the Cowboys were winning Super Bowls that basically hooked me into watching this game that I love so much and has now made me a complete degenerate that, you could say led to this very moment in my life. But yeah, I already messaged you that on Slack, so we can move on. I let Kendall know last week I was jealous of her getting to meet Emmitt Smith.
Yes, and Sean Alexander. Oh, we talked with so many great people, but we can recap that right now. Let's go through a Super Bowl recap here, presented by DraftKings, and kind of what we saw, Dwain, in this game yesterday. Eagles took down the Chiefs. I don't even think saying the word like they beat the Chiefs, that's not enough. Like the word beat is too kind, and some of the things, I don't know if we can swear on the show, but some of the things that I would like to say that they did to the Chiefs, we can't say here. But Dwain, 40-22 to win the Super Bowl. In your wildest dreams, in any way that you thought the Eagles could win this game, was this on the bingo card for you?
Absolutely not. I mean, but this just goes to show you this is the way this sport works. This is the way that gambling works. This is the way that fantasy works. For 2 years, I've been saying, man, the Chiefs have Patrick Mahomes, but the team around him is just not what it was. And I leaned into going with the Eagles 2 years ago. Last year, I went with the 49ers. This year, I'm finally like, I'm not doing it again. I'm not going against Patrick Mahomes. I'm just going to go with the Chiefs. I'm going to go with the safe bet. And finally, all those concerns that I've had about the Chiefs, which we've also seen throughout this season. Hey, my wife is a huge Chiefs fan. And even she throughout the season was saying, I don't know about this year. I know we're winning, but things are really close, and they were just really exposed this weekend. Would I expect them to lose by this much, Kendall, if they replayed this game another 9 times? No, but I think there could be another blowout because the Eagles are just so good across the board. Yes, Patrick Mahomes is better than Jalen Hurts, but when you look at the offensive line for the Chiefs against the defensive front for the Eagles, I think that was really the huge story of the game. I saw you tweeting out some good stuff during the game, some of the stuff coming from the broadcast. My father-in-law just stopped off to leave something for my son for when he gets home later for his birthday today. He was traveling through town, and he even was like, he's like, those Eagles just with the front four, no stunts, no blitzes, 47% pressure rate. I was like, are you reading Kendall's tweet? Are you following Kendall on Twitter? Because Kendall was dropping this knowledge yesterday. So I think that's just tough. Like, even if you're Patrick Mahomes, really tough to overcome. So no, I didn't foresee something this huge. I will say when you step back from it though, and you look at how good the Eagles are across the board, all the different positions, like you can see how it could happen.
Yeah, and that was the one part, Dwain, when I was rewatching and looking through everything, like Fangio did not do anything overly complicated either while we're talking about the defense, right? He just said, I've got the best guys in front of me here. And to be honest, like Mahomes just looked not like Mahomes. It's almost like the Superman cape came off and they just said, you know what? There was never a moment in that game, Dwain, too, where I thought, okay, it's the Chiefs. They're going to be able to get through this. I mean, every time he dropped back, it seemed frantic. It seemed like he just couldn't get his feet set. He was running around almost like a chicken with its head cut off. And so Fangio did amazing things, and that was able to kind of get the game going for the Philadelphia Eagles. They didn't even need to rely on Saquon Barkley like people thought. They said he's going to go for 100, 125, 150. That's how they're going to win. It was really the defense, and then Jalen Hurts was able to step up, kind of silence some doubters. But I thought it was phenomenal for Vic Fangio to be going from obviously a guy who's a way better coordinator than he is a head coach, and to come in and do this with not an overly complicated kind of design in this game. It was impressive. They just didn't look like the Chiefs. They didn't look like the Chiefs that won 11 one-score games. They looked like the Chiefs team that could have been losing all season. I couldn't tell the difference.
Yeah, I mean, and hat tip to Fangio, but this is something he's been doing for a very long time. I remember whenever he basically put the blueprint down for the Rams, and then the Patriots took that and, beat the Rams in the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
So he's one of these bend, don't break defenses, but it works a little different when you're so loaded. Like, I think the big story with the Eagles, and Matthew Berry hit this yesterday on Twitter. So I was just about to say something and I saw Matthew tweeted it. So I just liked it and retweeted his. But like the MVP of the Eagles, it's Howie Roseman. Like, I mean, what this guy did, Kendall, going out and getting Quinyon Mitchell this year in the draft, knowing the secondary was so bad last year. You go out and you get Cooper DeJean, the number 1 rated slot corner, if you look at PFF coverage grades, to go with Darius Slay, who was just a little bit healthier this year. You go and you grab Gardner Johnson 2 years ago, a guy that had been proven, but, just couldn't quite maybe get along with certain teammates, things like that. Reed Blankenship is an undrafted free agent. He is a starting safety for the Eagles. So when you look across the board, and then, Bond that they brought in at linebacker, the number 1 graded linebacker over at PFF is Zach Bond. So making that addition, obviously they spent the high draft capital on Jalen Carter, that front 4 we already talked about, Jordan Davis a couple of years ago as well. So like they're just loaded up front, but it's these other little moves that they continue to make. And then like the same thing on the offensive side of the ball, Kendall, Jordan Mailata. I mean, this is a guy that was a 7th round pick, played rugby and, came through the NFL developmental league. No other team really took a chance on him. The Eagles saw some traits. It took some time. It was 2021 before he really got going, got some ball games in 2020, but just their constant ability to like know how to make the short-term moves, but still keep a long-term view to the future. I think that's really like what the hallmark sign of a really good general manager is someone that can balance those two things. How do you find some of the lower risk picks that you can let develop? You hit on some of these shorter term things like a Saquon Barkley, plugging in with Zach Bond this year, Mekhi Becton, like another guy that was 11th overall pick for the Jets, and they didn't want him anymore. And the Eagles were like, well, this is a talented dude. We can plug him into our offense. So just multiple moves. And then you bring it all together, right, to form your team and still have a path to the future. Obviously, Jalen Hurts played a good game as well, but that's a guy that they got with a 2nd round pick. So I think Howie Roseman is ultimately like the MVP. I know we give the MVP award to the players on the field for the game. It deserved to go to Jalen Hurts, given how good he played in the game. And quarterback position we know is important. But if I was able to, I would give it to the GM. I think Howie Roseman has done an incredible job, and this team is also set up not just for now, Kendall, but to continue to remain good.
Yeah, they're going to be good for the long haul. And the thing with it is, Dwain, like you're right, they set the market instead of chase it. Like they know exactly what they're doing in the drafts too. We always say, how did the NFL let Howie Roseman get this guy? And it's just like they do all these things right. It's AJ Brown, it's Devontae Smith, Dickerson, Jordan Mailata, like all 4 of those guys, those 4 key members of the offense. They combined offseason extensions for those guys, $155 million. So they set the market, they don't chase it, and they know exactly what they're doing. So I think that leads into the next question when you talk about, Jalen Hurts and MVPs and stuff. I mean, for you, has Jalen Hurts silenced some of the doubters? Now, I know us for fantasy football, we don't doubt. We love Jalen Hurts over here, but for yourself, do you think he silenced doubters after this MVP performance?
Well, man, I don't think you can look. I mean, he's won a Super Bowl, so I mean, it's really tough to say that he didn't silence the critics. I think this is more of a team win, and this is not. I'm not trying to knock him, but like Patrick Mahomes, if he wins a game, it's like Herculean is carrying the whole team more or less. With Jalen Hurts, it's more of like all those other things we just talked about. You've got AJ Brown on your team, plus Devonta Smith and Dallas Goedert. Could you imagine Patrick Mahomes with those 3 players? So, but to your point, like you can't knock that too much because like this is a team sport. Right. And you're trying to put together the best formula to go out and win these games. The Eagles know what their formula is. They know they want to lean into the run game and they want to play really good defense. And Jalen Hurts makes the plays when he needs to. And Kendall, the fact of the matter is, like when he needs to come up with the big play in the run game, and he did it multiple times to the Chiefs last night, just kind of back-breaking plays where the Chiefs were trying to get a little bit of momentum. It's a 3rd down. What does he do? He takes off, scrambles for that 1st down. That is just a killer when you think, finally, we've got A.J. Brown covered. We've got Devonta Smith covered. Oh, yeah, we even got Dallas Goedert covered. You can't throw Saquon Barkley in the flat. Oh, crap. There goes Jalen Hurts for 12 yards and a 1st down. So his ability to pick his spots to do those things, and obviously, Kendall, what they do with the tush push as well. There's a lot of great things about, Jalen Hurts. If I'm starting an NFL team tomorrow, he's not in the top 6 quarterbacks I'm taking, but but I think he's a top 12 quarterback in the NFL. And we love him in fantasy. In fantasy, he's a top 3 guy because a lot of the things we talk about with the dual threat quarterbacks. So love him in fantasy. I like him in the NFL, but obviously he's good enough to win Super Bowls with on a team like the
He
Eagles.
is. Yeah, he's been doubted for a long. I shouldn't say doubted for a long time, but I mean it goes back to college, University of Alabama, and getting benched for Tua Tagovailoa. There's a lot that goes into it, but I thought during this Super Bowl that it was good. Spagnuolo was going to try and bring everything with that blitz heavy approach, and he was changing. He's changing plays at the line of scrimmage and doing everything that he could to slice and dice this team. And it's definitely a team win. But you're right, Dwain. They're winning with him as well. It's not. It's just good things all for Jalen Hurts there. What do you think with the Eagles, though? Are they your early favorite for next year's Super Bowl to win it all? I know we're sickos, Dwayne. I don't even know. We're sickos. Listen, we have to do it. They're the favorites right now to win it all next year. So I have to bring it up.
I think, these things are always tough to answer because there's so many dominoes left to fall. What could make you feel comfortable about saying yes, that it's the Eagles, as we just talked about how much we like Howie Roseman, right? And how he seems to always be one step ahead of the game, whether it's finding that player to plug in on a 1-year deal or whether it's taking a shot on somebody maybe other people don't see something in that you allow to develop over time. So I think that with Howie Roseman and the moves that he's made and the confidence we have in him, if you want to have the Eagles as the favorite, go ahead. I think it's still tough, though, to pick against the Chiefs. I mean, we are talking about a team that in a 1-game sample got beat badly by the Eagles. But if we zoom out, we look at the last 5 years, the Chiefs really are still the team to beat. If you wanted to kind of pick that apart, you could say that, well, really, this was the game where we saw it all fall apart. They've been able to kind of hold it together, win these close games, kind of scratch them out. But it's still Patrick Mahomes, Kendall. And I think here's the other thing for the Chiefs. I know we'll talk about them more in a minute, but this is going to motivate you. You didn't just get beat in the Super Bowl. You got stomped in the Super Bowl. So I really do believe their front office is going to be very motivated. So ultimately, I think the answer to this question is going to change in the coming months, but it's very close for me between the Eagles as well as the Chiefs. I know we got the Bills with the rough loss to the Chiefs 2 weeks ago. I think they're right there in the mix as well. Baltimore Ravens, obviously still another good team. 49ers, the 49ers are going to be back in the mix next year. I know they had some things not go their way. So NFC, Detroit Lions, there's other good teams as well. So I'll give a slight edge to the Eagles, Kendall, but I don't think it's like a slam dunk.
No, I agree. I don't think it is either. And you named all the other teams that are going to be right back in this mix. It's the Bills. It's the Ravens. I mean, the Commanders went this far this season too. So there's a lot that we can look at next season. Whereas some of these teams they're going to be hungry. I think the Ravens especially, they're going to think like this. We have to do this now. Like we talk about Super Bowl windows all the time. Same thing I think can be said for the Bills. So their windows are open, but they need to go through it and kind of claim it and get over that hump in the playoffs. I want to continue with you talking about the Kansas City Chiefs and how they kind of do get back to, I don't know, return to glory just seems so, it's the Chiefs. Like they already have so many wins, but this team this season felt like an extension almost, Dwayne, of the team last year, where that's why I couldn't bet against them. I said last year that they couldn't win because they had no offensive playmakers. And then all of a sudden they win the Super Bowl last year. I said the same thing this year. I said, I don't want to doubt them, but their offensive weapons obviously were something that felt like, especially in this game, everything that could have gone wrong kind of rose to the surface here. And same with their left tackle issues. They had that all season long, but that offensive line just did not play well in this game. They didn't have the big playmakers to step up. So when you look at the Chiefs for next year, how do they return to that glory in 2025?
Well, and 2 of the Super Bowls that we've seen Patrick Mahomes lose, like he's been under intense pressure. If this game looked similar to what we saw, against, the Bucks, a few years back, and he just didn't have time to make the plays. What's interesting is, even though they did have woes at the tackle position all season long, it was pretty much masked. Like Patrick Mahomes is able to offset that. And quarterback pressure rate, part of that is owned by quarterbacks. We know that looking at the data year over year. Offensive line matters, but the quarterbacks are also a huge part of that. And Patrick Mahomes is doing a great job of getting rid of the ball quickly and being able to avoid a lot of the issues that having a bad offensive line can cause. He's also really good at manipulating the pocket, knowing when to scramble, knowing when to get outside of it. So you're still going to have all those things. But yeah, if I'm the Chiefs, Kendall, I am trying to find a way to upgrade tackle play, because imagine a world where you do give Patrick Mahomes more time and then the whole playbook is really available to him on a higher percentage of the plays. I think what goes along with that is also just reconsidering where you're at with the playmakers. I know Hollywood Brown was just on a 1-year deal. Rashee Rice recovering from that nasty knee injury. Just very unfortunate to see Rashee Rice go down. DeAndre Hopkins, like, didn't really do anything. Older player, probably just moving on from him. Xavier Worthy did make noise down the stretch, got some trash time production in this game as well. That was a great catch deep down the field. So I know it was late in the game, but man, that's a good catch by Worthy. So he's a guy that came on in the second half of the season. So I think they can feel good about that. Say you get Rashee Rice back by like midseason next year and he eventually works his way. Who knows if he'll be full strength at all next year? More than likely, probably not. Probably 2 years away for Rashee Rice. But I still think you got to consider another player, just because I do start to wonder, Kendall, like Travis Kelce, like we saw a step down this year. He wasn't a 0 in fantasy. He wasn't a 0 as a tight end. He was still one of the top 4 or 5 guys, but it does look like, age is finally starting to set in. Like, and age is undefeated. Father time is undefeated. So you've got to start figuring out. It can't be Juju Smith-Schuster. It can't be these types of guys. You need some better players to try to scheme around as far as like your playmakers go. They've done a nice job, like on defense. Like, I think they can win with defense. It would probably be good to get some additional, players up front to help add some additional pressure for Spagnuolo. But at the same time, like, they've shown they can patch holes every year on defense and still have a good squad through their scheme and the things that they like to do. So I'm with you. I think offensive line is somewhere they need to focus, and probably focusing in on another playmaker at wide receiver or tight end for Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, and the age clip thing is always, I always reference people to go back to that article that you wrote at fantasylife.com. But the one thing that I always point to is that, you always say you never want to guess when it happens, but when there are examples, you want to pay attention. And that felt like what we saw this season, just with the age cliff with Travis Kelce there. And left tackle, it just wasn't good. I mean, they didn't even blitz him once, and they got this kind of production yesterday, Dwain. That was the crazier part. Like, True Media comes out and says they were able to do this. They didn't bring any extra defenders. They had 6 sacks, 18 pressures, 40.9% pressure rate. And Patrick Mahomes after the game was like, I think they blitzed me like 2 or 3 times. And everyone was like, no, they blitzed you 0 times. Like, to be able to do that is insane. And what about, let me ask you really quick before we move on, the running back position. This can't continue, right? With Isaiah Pacheco, do you think with a full offseason with Isaiah Pacheco getting healthier that's going to make a difference here? Or are they going to really have to patch that up? Because if we talk about Kareem Hunt for another season, Dwain, my head's going to explode and I'm not going to know what to do. But really, that seemed like something they couldn't get things going there either. They couldn't rely on the run game. They had to abandon it so early.
Yeah. So, I mean, ultimately that's a call by their medical staff, because Pacheco was coming back from the injury that we saw really limit Mark Andrews, limited Tony Pollard for a full season. So it could be a situation where Pacheco could just look more like himself in the following year. I think you want to be careful not over investing, right, at the running back position with this team for the Chiefs, as much as you're paying your quarterback and what you need to do with some of the other positions. But I definitely wouldn't be against, to your point, like adding some different competition to go along with Isaiah Pacheco. Obviously they had a P. Ryan to be their passing down back this last year, but it would be interesting to see if they had an explosive playmaker as a pass catcher out of the backfield and what that could potentially do for someone like Mahomes, because defenses are playing deep so much, right? So having another playmaker potentially underneath to kind of create some of these route combinations that just put defenders in a bind, and maybe it's between Kelce and your running back. Right now, it's mostly between the slot wide receiver or the underneath Z receiver and Kelce. That's a lot of the stuff that they're doing today. But with Kelce starting to take a little bit of a step down, like adding a better playmaker, as a pass catcher out of the backfield, like that definitely could help. The problem is there's just not very many of those that really can be true difference makers. Like CMC is one of them. Alvin Kamara is another one, obviously getting a little bit older. Jahmyr Gibbs is one of those guys. Looking at this class that's coming up, Ashton Jeanty did have one really good year as a receiver out of the backfield. I don't think the Chiefs will be in position to spend a pick on Jeanty unless he were to fall in the draft. But there are a couple of other names that are more of like that receiving archetype in this draft. So maybe they do something like that. Maybe they spend a 4th, 5th round pick, not a lot of draft capital, but someone just to help give them that more explosive run after the catch ability, as well as that ability to work like different matchups against linebackers and safeties from out of the backfield.
I agree with you though. We're gonna see the Chiefs back here. It just feels like it's still the Chiefs. You still have Andy Reid. You still have Patrick Mahomes. You still have Spags on the other side. So I'm with you right there. Best Super Bowl commercial. What was your favorite? Before we get into your what did you learn? What did you do for 2024?
Yeah,
what was your favorite?
Yeah, my favorite one was the cul-de-sac. I just like it had the perfect blend. If you look at you've got Post Malone in it, who like my kids love. So they were like, oh, look, it's Post Malone. What's the comedian's name that was in it? Like he's just really blown up.
Yeah,
like here recently.
He has. What is his name?
I'm gonna forget it. Shane Gillis. Yeah.
Oh,
like
yeah,
so
yeah.
he is great. And like she's out there wearing the dad clothes. Like it's just I love it. Both of them wearing the dad clothes. And then you get Peyton Manning in it. And Peyton Manning's got on a fanny pack. I mean, that was really good. I thought the Flag 50 was also really cool. The girls playing flag football, out there doing the reverse Saquon hurdle. I thought that was pretty sweet. There were quite a few good ones, but I would go with the cul-de-sac one. Which one was your favorite, Kendall?
I liked, I think it was Mountain Dew. Seal, the singer as a seal.
Oh,
Did you see that one? That was hilarious.
I did. Yeah, that was like that was one of the first few.
That was funny. That was funny. And then I was going to say, the Pringles one or Dan Levy's eyebrows flew off. I think that was, I don't know if that was homes.com or whatever. But then someone else did the same thing with a mustache. So I was like, this is like an odd amount of eyebrows and mustaches like flying around. I don't know if they got together and just decided to do the same thing, but that was like really weird. Really weird.
I wonder if Overzet was on with us, if Pete was on, do you think he would go with the ultra hustle just because there was pickleball involved?
Probably. Yeah. He loved, because he loves pickleball. He'll say Catherine O'Hara and he'd just be like, I hated that commercial. I'm surprised he didn't tweet about it. Maybe he did. Maybe we just missed it, but he hated
I might have missed it as well. I thought that one was pretty good.
That's such a niche thing to hate too, because all I thought about during that commercial was Pete Overzet. Isn't that sick? Like he's turned us all.
That's the first thing that came to my mind as well.
Yes. Yeah, it's just sick. What about halftime performance? Seating. I know
halftime performance. So look,
where does that rank for you all time? Oh, here we go.
It doesn't rank highly for me, but I have to tell you guys, I don't listen to Kendrick Lamar. Like the rap I listen to is like rap that probably none of you guys have ever heard of, like that I listened to when I was growing up. And it's not that I'm against rap. Like my kids play Tyler, the Creator. They play this different stuff. So I hear it and I still appreciate it, but I'm like not a hardcore, Kendrick Lamar fan. So I just couldn't really follow along. And also it was fine, like if you like him, but I think it's tough to be anytime you're a performer that's like more of I don't want to call him a niche performer because he's still huge, but he's not Beyonce, right? He's not, Rihanna. He's not like some of these people that can cross genres, like of all these different people are going to like it. So I think anytime you have that, that's when you get more of like a polarizing halftime show. Like my son Landry loves Kendrick Lamar. He loved the show. He thought the sound was kind of off. The normal complaints, like trying to listen to like the Super Bowl and, the quality of the music itself can sometimes be tough. So he liked it. And so that's what I go off of. If the person in my house that loves Kendrick Lamar, he liked the show. So it had to be good. But for me personally, no, it's not in the top 10. Like Michael Jackson's my number one all time. Obviously the Cowboys won that Super Bowl, but Michael Jackson was like just huger than life, like when I was growing up, and it was an amazing halftime show. So like, I'll leave it with Landry. I judge based on him because he's our Kendrick Lamar fan in the house and he liked it, but no, not in my top 10.
Respect. I loved it. I love Kendrick Lamar. I thought it was very good. So I'm with your son. I'm with your son Landry on this. What do we need? What have you listened to? We need Taylor Swift. I know you'd like that one because of Zoe. Oh, Arctic Monkeys. If Arctic Monkeys did the Super Bowl, you would love it.
Yeah. See, and I would know them because Zoe has introduced me to them and I would know the catalog. You know how it goes, Kendall. Like even when I get introduced to a new artist that I eventually do like say somebody invites me to go with them to see a show, because this happens a lot. Like I got a buddy that's super into music. He'd be like, hey, you got to come see this band with me. I'll go see them. But the first show I see them, it's like, okay, they're good. Like I like it. But if you don't know the catalog, it's tougher, right? To really be into it. And I just didn't know Kendrick Lamar's catalog. So that's on me probably more than anything.
We'll get you there. It'll be okay. Before we continue on with your lessons from 2024, let's hear from our friends over at DraftKings. Who's scoring big in the NBA this season? You are, with all the new ways to get in on the action with my partners at DraftKings Sportsbooks. From monster slams to dishing the rock to cleaning the glass, get behind your favorite players and the prop bets you can make on DraftKings, the home of NBA player props. Here's something special for first timers. New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get $150 instantly in bonus bets. Take it to the rack with DraftKings Sportsbook. Download the DraftKings app now and sign up using code FANTASYLIFE. The crown is yours. All right, let's continue on here with some 2024 lessons. We had good things happen in 2024 from the fantasy season, Dwayne. We had some bad things happen to us from the fantasy season in 2024, but you've got your articles live. FantasyLife.com is where everyone can go and check these out 100% free. So we're going to start with the good. You know, we're not going to start with the bad ever. We're going to start with the things you got right from 2024, starting with some lessons. And I really do like this first lesson here, talking about buying cheap dual threat quarterbacks. And really the best reference point this season that you were on, we know our guy Matthew Berry was on, but a lot of the Fantasy Life staff, Jayden Daniels is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, and the way I created this list is I actually went back and looked at my guys article on the site to hold myself accountable, because these are the players that ultimately I touted the most and I also drafted the most myself. There are other lessons we could talk about, but I really focused it in on those guys, Kendall, that I talked about in that article. So if you guys want to, check up on me and make sure, that I'm like being honest about all this, you can. But yeah, I think, when we look at the dual threat thing, we've just seen it so many years now, right? A few years ago, it was really Lamar Jackson that was the guy that came through in the same way. But anytime you have a quarterback like Jalen Hurts was it a few years ago, right? And that was Matthew Berry's ride or die that year. And he went on to be the top quarterback in fantasy football a couple of years, or maybe the year before that. It was Josh Allen, a guy that people were taking around 7 or 8. But anytime you have a chance to take a quarterback that we know could rush for 750, 800 yards, Kendall, no matter what we think they're going to do through the air, like they're a guy that's going to be really hard for them to not finish as a top 8 or 10 quarterback. So if you go back and you look at the 21 quarterbacks that recorded at least 100 or more rushing attempts, over the since 2011, basically, they've averaged 20.3 fantasy points per game, and they finished as the QB8. And that's all I needed to go off of. I'm like, okay, you're going to give me Jayden Daniels this late. And a lot of people are like, well, he's a rookie. They don't have a lot of weapons. He might be terrible as a passer. Well, we've got examples, Kendall, of these guys that were really terrible passers in the past. It doesn't mean it's going to work 100% of the time, but typically these guys are hits. And we have seen guys like Taysom Hill not be a very good quarterback, Tim Tebow, and still be players that put up really solid fantasy points. Now, we have another guy we're going to talk about a little later in the show that I realize is this same archetype that didn't do as well. We'll break him down then. But yeah, Jayden Daniels, the guy you were getting in round 8, and he was a player that gave you a chance to offset what your league mates were doing in selecting Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson's in round 2 through 4. So if you're getting a guy around 8 or 9, and someone else is spinning around 2 or 3 pick to get it, and you end up getting the same thing, that is a huge, huge win for you in fantasy. And for quarterbacks, one of the easiest way to do it is to focus on these dual threat guys.
And I remember, when we were breaking this down on Sirius XM with myself and Adam, and when you would come on for the utilization report, a lot of people in the offseason were a little bit nervous about it, Jayden Daniels, even though we were telling them like, hey, no, it's the dual threat ability of a quarterback for fantasy football that we always want to try and get. And it was more nervous about the team, and it was nervous about not having anything around him, the coaching. We didn't know what this Commanders team was going to look like for 2024. And I get that, but it's the same thing here, Dwayne, where sometimes listen, it doesn't work. And we're going to talk about that here in a second. But with that dual threat ability and everything that we try and chase in fantasy football, the upside for Jayden Daniels was just much higher. And we tried to talk people into it more of saying, we understand that you might not like the team, and the Commanders were only supposed to win, 4 or 6 games, I believe it was, but you kind of just had to look past it. And I know that's hard for a lot of people to do, but that's, just something that you have to try with someone that's dual threat like Jayden Daniels.
Yeah, and again, I mean, you just go back to the data, you zoom out, and you look at what these players similar to him have done over time. Again, it won't be 100%. There will always be outliers that defy the rule, and you're like, oh, wow, they didn't hit. But the deal is, anytime you have something where, 80 to 70% of these players that are similar to what he does hit, you got to take your chances, especially whenever the ADP is depressed. And I know early on, like Jayden Daniels was like around 11, 12 pick, and then he moved up to 8 or 9, and it scared a lot of people. But that was still, in my opinion, you just have to look at that relative to where people were taking Anthony Richardson and the other guys, and it was still of value based on where those players were going. So yeah, I think you got to be willing to stay with these dual threat guys, and it's just something we want to continue to attack in our fantasy drafts in the future.
Another lesson that you had written about, talent is better than predicting roles, and you liked to highlight Achane here.
Yeah. And so look, I'm the utilization guy. So like, I'm the one coming to you telling you, great, we want utilization. We want to understand what these players' roles are, what the roles that they take end up being really do matter. If you get the carries inside the 5, that's the most prolific role on the team as far as a points per snap basis. So we want players to get that. But the big knock on Achane this preseason, Kendall, people knew that he played really well, but it was really a few things. Number one, he's too small. Number two, he's injury prone, which he wasn't in college. People just looked at his rookie season. Now, he did end up dealing with an injury this year. But then you look at the third thing, and it was really the fact that he wasn't going to have the carries inside the 5-yard line because that's where Raheem Mostert was so good the year before. And a lot of that for people tied back to the fact that he was too small and going to be injury prone and that the Dolphins wouldn't want to use him in that way. Well, guess what? That was wrong. If you look at his attempts inside the 5-yard line, up 36 percentage points. He handled 70% of the carries inside the 5-yard line. So the bottom line is what you said. If you have an opportunity to invest in a player like De'Von Achane that was so good in his rookie season, typically those are players that have shown to be able to grow their role. So with a guy like Achane, big rookie season, very efficient, explosive, plays in an offense that you like. You just want to lean into those things and not worry so much about trying to get down every exact role. He obviously took on more work in the 2-minute offense, passing downs and things like that. So major role growth for Achane across the board. And it makes sense. He's a talented player.
RB6 in Ian Hartit's way too early rankings, fantasylife.com is where you can go and check those out for running backs. Do you think that's pretty much the range where you're going to have them? I know it's early and we're sick, but
yeah, and I think the guy that'll challenge him will be Genty, depending on where he goes in the NFL draft. But you got a lot of good running backs that had really good years, right? So I mean, that's going to push all these players up the draft board. But yeah, when you consider age, you consider a lot of the different components. I do think that is around the same range. The other little quick takeaway is just like, the smaller backs, Kendall, that are explosive, like people have got to stop freaking out about this. James Cook, same thing, took over more of the carries inside the 5-yard line. What was the one thing that everyone said about James Cook? They're like, oh, we know he's a good pass receiver. We know he can play in the pass game, but he'll never get the carries inside the 5. I mean, he blew up. The dude scored 18 rushing touchdowns, and he got a lot of the carries inside the 5. I think he finished 11th or 12th and carries inside the 5 per game. Bucky Iriving, right? That's another guy. So a lot of these guys that people think they know, you don't really know. We've seen Austin Eckler, Jamal Charles, many players in the past that were good take over carries inside the 5-yard line later in their career, even though they didn't weigh 200 pounds.
And another one that you had mentioned, though, and talking about running backs, is we can go to Bucky Iriving, because that was another lesson where you said, hey, knowing when to buy the preseason hype is really important. And Bucky Iriving was one of those guys for you.
Yeah, and this one's tricky because a lot of times, like this preseason stuff we see, it doesn't carry signal into the regular season. Sometimes it does. The utilization typically does, but then the player has to go ahead and perform once they're given that role early in the season. So there's no clear-cut answer here. But I think when you start to stack up the data points for Bucky Iriving, Kendall, again, this can be dangerous because I think we can see connections and we start connecting dots that aren't really there. But you had Rachaad White, who had not really played well, like as far as his explosive rate, his ability to generate, these big plays down the field, his ability to really gash through the line of scrimmage. And those were things that the coaches were all over him about in the offseason. Then they go out and they draft Bucky Iriving with a 4th-round pick. He comes out in the preseason and in training camp, and he starts doing all the things on the checklist that the coaches had for Rachaad White. And Rachaad White is still struggling. So I think sometimes you want to lean into it a little bit more than others, and I think you have to be willing to adjust your priors. I do think that how far a player moves up does matter. So if suddenly like a player like Bucky Irving last year, Kendall, had moved up to, oh, he's a 7th or a 6th round pick, that makes it a lot tougher. But that's not where he moved from. He moved from being like basically undrafted in a lot of leagues that people play in to being someone you're taking in around 11 or 12, right? Best ball, he moved up to being like a round 10 or 11 draft pick. So that's still in a range where you can take a swing on a player like that, and it's not going to completely kill you if you're wrong. So I do think it's okay to, realize that sometimes preseason stuff is noise, sometimes it's not. But just looking at what the coaches wanted and knowing what Rachaad White's skill set was, and then seeing how well Bucky Irving was playing, I think that was one where it warranted moving him up the board. Probably, and we were all over him. Like, we touted Bucky Irving really heavily. This is on the we got it right list. But again, just kind of when I try to think back through it, I'm like, how many times am I going to be right in this scenario? Like, it can be tough. But again, Rachaad White was a key part of the process in thinking through Bucky Irving.
Yeah, it's definitely difficult to get these ones right. But I remember, we were in New York and you guys were doing drafts over there talking about Bucky Irving. So it was a fun one to watch. I'm curious, do you think that if they bring, because this was the thing with Ian when we talked about this, is that he has him RB14, I believe, for early rankings. And the thought is that they're going to bring potentially someone else in. You've got Liam Cohen, their offensive coordinator, leaving to get the Jaguars head coaching position. I don't know if I see that. How can you see what Bucky Irving did last season and say to yourself, well, this we need someone else in here? I still think that they have loyalty to Rachaad White. He still has a contract over there, but I can't imagine them bringing someone else in. Can you?
I mean, we'll never know. They could go out and a certain running back falls to them in the draft that they really love. They could take them in round 3 or round 2. And that is the danger when you have a player like Bucky Irving, who is a 4th round draft pick, because the moment you spend a 2nd round draft pick on a running back in a draft after you took Bucky Irving, well, now the GM is invested, right? And seeing that player get some playing time, that becomes a dynamic between the head coach as well as the GM. And so those things can all play factors. Like, there's politics that are involved with this stuff. So it's a never say never kind of situation, but I lean more with you. I'm going to take a little bit more of a bullish stance with Bucky Irving and just assume that because he played so well, like, even if they go grab somebody, I think he's in for half the work. And if he's in for half the work on an offense that we like and we feel good about, even though, lose Liam Cohen, but we've got some good playmakers here with the Buck. We'll see what they do with Chris Godwin. Like, he's available to leave coming off the injury. So we'll see where that all ends up. But, Baker's played good enough the last couple of years, and Bucky Irving just played out of his mind. So I really look at him as being similar to Devon Achane. Right. And people talk themselves out of it. They're like, oh, well, he's small. He's, they could draft another player. He's injury prone. Bucky Irving missed some time. So I could see a lot of the same narratives that got people to not draft Devon Achane being the same thing that gets you with Bucky Irving. But Ian is right. If they do draft, a running back in the first couple of rounds, that will have to change our view. But I lean more with you. I don't know that they're going to really do a lot given what Bucky Irving did last year.
Yeah, he was just so efficient. Did you see Liam Cohen's opening press conference for the Jacksonville Jaguars? Duval. Did you see that? Did that not cringe you out? Was that so cringy?
Yeah, it cringed me out. This is going to be a gold mine. That's what I thought. Liam Cohen is going to be an absolute gold mine for content.
All right, Dwain, more lessons, things you got right, because it was a lot of things you got right in 2024. Let's just be honest with ourselves here. There was no other player, though, that I think you talked about more. The person that you talked about the most, Malik Nabers, though. I mean, you were on Malik Nabers from the very beginning. The lesson that you had for him, though, was early round rookie wide receivers are gold. And there's really no better player to highlight there than Malik Nabers.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, and the supermodel loved him. I'm working on the supermodel for this year, Kendall. That's what I've been working on these last couple of weeks. So we'll have some more information around that coming very soon on this year's draft class. But if you want to just keep it super simple, like for the case of this argument, wide receivers that go in that top 6, 8 picks, like Kendall, we can just look at the history of them. They've just historically been a cheat code, especially where you get them in drafts. Now, in recent years, they have gotten more expensive. Malik Nabers in home leagues last year was somewhere between rounds 4 and 6, depending on where you drafted. But he did start to creep up at the end. And yes, thank God Malik Nabers went off, because yes, you're right. This is the guy that I talked about more than anyone. And there's always risk when you push someone so much that, man, if it doesn't go well, you're going to hear about it. But it worked out well. And let's just look at the history of this. Going back to 2011, Kendall, we look at wide receivers taken in the top 6 picks of the NFL draft. We've got Malik Nabers scoring 18.1 fantasy points per game. Jahmyr Gibbs, Jamar Chase, 18 fantasy points per game. Julio Jones, 15.7. Jalen Waddle, 15.5. He was an absolute smash where you were getting him his rookie year, which was round 9 or 10. And that was in sharp drafts, even later in home leagues. AJ Green in his rookie year, same year as Julio Jones. Talk about a loaded draft class that year, Kendall. 14.5 fantasy points per game. And the guys that didn't do as well still didn't kill you. Amari Cooper, 13.4. Sammy Watkins, 12.4. Marvin Harrison Jr., that was the guy that got everybody last week. He's the example, Kendall, of last year where it didn't work. Still gave you 12 fantasy points per game. And then Justin Blackmon, like going way back here for the Jaguars, only played a short term with them because of off the field issues, but he averaged 11.4 fantasy points per game. So overall, like, look, you're just getting guys that are out producing their draft capital. A couple you could say in there were busts for where they were taken in fantasy drafts, but overall they get depressed still because they're rookies and people don't like the uncertainty of that. And the thing that's happening is they're just coming into the league more and more ready to produce, Kendall. And also their teams are more and more willing just to put them on the field and let them play.
Yeah, that was the big part, Dwain, is that, and that was a conversation I remember having a lot with callers calling in for Sirius, was that they hated the Giants. They just said, well, who's the quarterback? What's going to happen here? And every week it was kind of trying to defend Malik Nabers, saying, okay, we understand, like, if it's Drew Lock, if it's Tommy DeVito, if it's Daniel Jones, like, the target share is something you always preach to Chase too, because you know that they were just going to feed him. The volume alone was what made him so great. And then coming out with 18.2 PPR points per game, third highest mark by a rookie wide receiver ever behind OBJ and Randy Moss. Like, he just ate. And that's the one thing that I understand people get a little bit scared. We've talked about this earlier in the show about landing spots, but just the volume alone for Malik Nabers was worth the price.
Yeah, and we thought that Marvin Harrison Jr. really had a much better landing spot because of Kyler Murray, and look what happens. That's how these things can really go both ways, and we're not always going to be right about them, but you do want to think it through. I think at the end of the day, Malik Nabers being priced as a round 4 or 5 pick, that was taking into account the fact that he was going to have quarterback, concerns. Like if he'd been going in round 2 around the same place as Marvin Harrison Jr., that would have been tougher, I think, to really be that on board with Malik Nabers and telling everyone to draft him in every single draft. A big part of it was you were getting that reduction in price because of the concerns around the quarterback play for Malik Nabers. So it really comes back to how things end up getting priced in the marketplace. We'd rather not invest a really high pick and a good wide receiver that's got a terrible quarterback, because in that range, Kendall, we're using it as a tiebreaker. We're like, we'll just lean to the guy that we think has the better quarterback. And I think that's logical still. But when you get a player that gets depressed, pushed down the board like Nabers did, I think you kind of got to just let it go and say, this player is too talented. He can be too much of a difference maker for me to worry about it where I'm getting him in my fantasy draft.
Another lesson from 2024, things you got right. React faster than the market. And you were looking to highlight Rashee Rice here. So can you break that one down for us?
Yeah, I mean, look, Rashee Rice, we got a lot of information, early on in training camp, early in the summer, and then we just continue to get more and more. And if folks aren't following Drew Davenport over on Twitter, I invite you to go. You got to go find him. He does these great threads on legal, and he breaks down. He's a lawyer. He breaks down what he thinks is going to happen. And man, I was just reading Drew's stuff, to be honest, Kendall. I just started getting more and more confident, but you weren't seeing the home league draft sites really react to it. You were seeing it on Underdog. You were seeing it in the best ball streets. You were seeing it on DraftKings for best ball, but we weren't seeing it in home leagues. And so essentially what you're doing is kind of like an arbitrage play. You're looking, you're saying, man, the price on this player over here in this market is so much more expensive than they are over here in this other one. I should probably really start drafting more of that player in this other market, like in these home leagues. And that was the deal with Rashee Rice. So you just want to make sure that you're paying attention to that. And if you are someone that likes to draft on DraftKings and play a lot of best ball, you just want to stay in touch with these guys like Drew and try to stay ahead of the curve, right? Because even though that was reacting, it reacted slow to the information. It was not reacting in real time with the information, because as the offseason goes along, you get new drafters coming in. Some have been paying more attention. Some haven't been paying as much attention. So just looking at ESPN, Nico Collins was picked 38, Kendall. Rashee Rice was picked 98. Nico Collins was picked 28. Rashee Rice was picked 84. Nico Collins was picked 35. Rashee Rice was picked 97. So had Rashee Rice not gotten hurt, what he had already been doing early in the season, he would have been going right around where Nico Collins would have been going in drafts, probably in the second round, third round latest. So you just got to really tune into those things, and you want to make sure that you're acting on it.
Was that the most disappointing, sad, just overall thing to have happen for you? Was Rashee Rice?
He was my highest exposure player.
Went down, and I remember that you told me that before kickoff and everything, before the game started, and I was like, oh no, there goes Rashee Rice. And you knew from the moment he went down that it didn't look good.
And thousands of dollars invested
Dwain.
in Rashee Rice. Now, it's okay. Like, the season still ended up being okay. It would have been a lot better. Like, it still won money, but the season would have been a lot better had Rashee Rice not gotten hurt, Kendall. That's for sure. And you know how many teams where I had Rashee Rice and Malik Nabers together? Like, I had a lot of those.
Yeah, and he looked like he was going to be on track for a really solid season too. So that was the more disappointing part. But that's okay, Dwain. That's okay. You can get him again next year, and everything's going to be just fine. Someone else and other guys that you're looking to target, though, something that you did get right and a lesson that you had: draft young target earners. Looking at a Trey McBride, who left, by the way, Travis Kelce off his top 5 tight ends in the NFL when we talked to him. Just had to throw that out there. Left him off.
Yeah, I mean, this was pretty straightforward. Like, we want young ascending players, and one of the best ways to know if they're ascending and if they're really talented is look at their ability to earn targets. It is the thing that correlates the most to future fantasy points. That's not fantasy points itself. Okay, so if we look at him in the year ahead of this past year, so in 2023, Kendall, once he took over that full-time role in week 8, he had a 29% target share and a 9.1 utilization score in 2023. So he finished so strong once Zach Ertz moved on. We knew that was a role he was going to get to keep. Yeah, we had Marvin Harrison Jr. coming in, but even if Marvin Harrison Jr. had an incredible year, this is just one of those offenses where it's around 2 people, right? There's not, if you look at Michael Wilson, never really been a high-end target earner. Greg Dortch is not a guy that gets to, sorry, Ian, if you ever listen to this, not a guy that gets to stay on the field all 3 downs. So there was just a real clear path to this offense being wrapped around 2 players in the passing game. And Trey McBride had just shown so much as an ascending young player at the tight end position. You just want to keep things simple. There is a guy on the flip side of that didn't do well, and that was Sam Laporta. But if you look at, his offensive environment and you look at the way he finished the year, Kendall, Laporta actually really got hot at the end of the year. And it does make you wonder, was he dealing with an injury? I'm sure we'll hear about it at some point. The offseason goes, yeah, man, I was playing with like a broken leg for 8 weeks. And we're like, man, why didn't we hear about this? Because some teams just don't share that sort of information. But it's not foolproof. You're not going to get everything right, but typically it's just a bet that we want to make. And this is one people have heard me say for a long time, but I just wanted to emphasize it again because Trey McBride was a great example of that.
So good. And you have to expect positive regression, right, in the touchdown department next year. He out-targeted, by the way, you know this, but Marvin Harrison Jr., 147 targets to Marvin Harris's 116. Yeah. But you have to assume, right, that it's only going to get better for Trey McBride.
Yeah, it's really hard to get that many targets, Kendall, and not score more touchdowns than what we saw from Trey McBride. So, yeah, I would expect this to be more of a 6 to 8 touchdown player. And if he did that and kept that target share intact, like, he would blow it away as a tight end next year. He'll be my tight end 1 in the ranks. It's him and Brock Bowers. I haven't done my ranks yet. If you guys want to check them out on fantasy, like Ian's done his, Paul's done his, Friedman's done his. Mine will be coming out here in a few weeks. But it's like something I actually think about, Kendall, trying to fall asleep. Brock Bowers, Trey McBride. It's like, what's wrong? You stressed out? Yeah, I can't figure out Trey McBride or Brock Bowers. Like, I'm pretty torn. But McBride, I think it's tough to go wrong with either one of these players.
Yeah, teasing us with the rankings. I like the way that you do it, Dwain. You're going to have everyone thinking about when your rankings come out here. Before we continue on with the things that you got wrong, let's hear from our friends over at Bud Light.
Hey, you're not actually allowed to drink in a beer commercial?
Since when?
You gotta wait till it's done. Oh.
5,
4, 3, 2, 1.
All right, things you got wrong here, Dwain. There's not a lot. Let me just say that, folks. It's Dwain McFarland here, so there's not a lot of things you got wrong. But the lessons that you learned from 2024, starting with not overreacting with dual threat quarterbacks. And really the one that you had mentioned before, you talked about Jayden Daniels. You said that there's kind of an opposite side to that, and the other one is Anthony Richardson here.
Yeah, and Anthony Richardson is a guy that like I also touted, not as much as I probably would have because Jayden Daniels was there at an even cheaper price. But I still think the story was the same for Richardson. He had not been good as a passer in college, was not good as a passer in his first year as a pro, but I couldn't let that completely stop me because he is such a crazy good athlete. And again, we've seen really bad passers in the past, Kendall. They're in that group. When I talked about it, the 21 quarterbacks that had at least 100 rushing attempts, like it's hard for them to not finish as a top 10, top 8 quarterback. And really, Anthony Richardson still fit into that group. And here's the thing you have to think about. If you think after 2 years on a guy like Anthony Richardson, it's time to throw in the towel, okay? I get it. It was really bad, Kendall. The guy completed 48% of his attempts. That's terrible.
Yeah.
That's not good at all. And so I understand that. But at the same time, had you thrown in the towel on Jalen Hurts after 2 seasons, which you could have done, Josh Allen, same thing, or just said, hey, they're never going to take that next big step forward, you would have missed out on their breakout seasons. Jalen Hurts that year after 2020, 52, or he's had a 52% completion rate in 2020, 230 yards per game over his last 4 games with the Eagles as the new starter. The next year he came out and completed 65% of his passes. Kendall made a huge step forward, was the QB6 with 21.3 fantasy points per game. Josh Allen, only 57% of his passes did he complete as a rookie, followed that up with only 59% in the second year. Now those marks are better than 48%, guys, so don't get me wrong, but those were numbers people were really worried about. Then what does he do? He comes out, and the next season in 2020, he goes off for 25.6 fantasy points per game. So what I'm telling you is Anthony Richardson is going to be way cheaper in fantasy drafts. And I already looked at Ian and a lot of the other ranks. I'm going to be higher. Now, if you had to tell me in a vacuum, you only get to draft one quarterback and you don't get to pick up another quarterback all season, you're playing some sort of league like that, I could see why you might want to take like one of the safer options. Like maybe you're like, oh, I'm going to take Matthew Stafford if he's back with the Rams, or, I'm going to go with, Michael Penix Jr. or something along those lines. But for me, if you're in a league where you get to work the waiver wire, Anthony Richardson is going to be very appealing if people are truly going to be letting him fall to QB 18 or 20, because if he does get it right, he still has the recipe to be one of the few names that could help offset those guys people are taking much earlier in drafts. So just remember, we've had other guys that didn't break out necessarily right away in this dual threat mold, and we could still see it from Anthony Richardson. The guy who never has, Kendall, is really Justin Fields. But when he's been on the field, Justin Fields has still been a good fantasy quarterback. Now, his challenge could be the same one as Anthony Richardson. How long will they stick with Richardson as the starter? So makes him trickier if you don't get to manage the waiver wire. But if it's a waiver wire league, man, I'm probably going to draft a ton of Anthony Richardson this year.
That's probably going to be one of the bigger quarterback questions we have this offseason and talking about the drafts, especially when you look at Superflex, because he's going to go late, Dwain, and you're going to be sitting there saying, all right, do I, hitch my wagon to Anthony Richardson, who could be a guy that helps you win the league, or it could be one, like you said, where you have to just say, this isn't working, got to go to the waiver wire. But I think it's interesting with the Colts because they kept everyone intact. Like they have their whole coaching staff back, and it's win now or everyone's going to get fired. So there's a lot of pressure there with Richardson and with that coaching staff to win with him. So yeah, how long is that going to be able to go? But especially with Superflex, that's going to be a really fun back and forth conversation between everyone. Another lesson that you learned in 2024, things you got wrong, high efficiency running backs don't always break out. What did you see here?
Yeah, so we're talking about Jaylen Warren here. And Jaylen Warren versus Najee Harris is kind of a similar story to Bucky Irving versus Rachaad White. It went the right way for one of these guys. It didn't go the right way for the other. Now, obviously, Jaylen Warren battled injuries early in the season, so that was part of it, Kendall. But I think, the thing you got to remember here is historical attempts and route participation is actually more predictive of the next year and what a player is going to do than just looking at their efficiency stats. Just because they were really efficient doesn't always mean their role is going to grow. But that is something we talked about with Jaylen Warren in the preseason. But it's a kind of player, if you do get it right, Kendall, I still think he's the right kind of bet you want to make, because he can catch balls in the passing game. So he can be a 3-down back. He can give you the big explosive plays. There are things that we like about it. But I think the lesson learned is you can't just be all in on just Jaylen Warren. There were other guys really in the same tier as Jaylen Warren. Chase Brown was sitting there. Bucky Irving, who we already talked about. Tajay Spears. I think the idea is you really want to be mixing these players up, especially if you're drafting multiple teams. And if you're going with a 0 running back build, or maybe you go with a hero running back build where you take one running back early and then you're waiting to around 7 or 8 to take your second running back, know that you're going to need to take multiple. Because had you gone ahead and taken Jaylen Warren and then you went ahead and took Chase Brown and Bucky Irving, you would have felt fine about it. Because you're trying to hit on just one or two of them. You know you're not going to hit on all these guys, so you can't just throw one dart with a guy like Jaylen Warren. So just thinking through who are the other guys that are a similar archetype to him, and make sure that you're spreading out those bets. And if you're waiting in your draft, get multiple to give you a shot at your running back 2 position versus just throwing one dart and praying that it does hit for you.
Yeah, especially, you just said it, but in those 0 RB builds, I think that's the thing that, you preach a lot, and Pete Overzet a lot of the time when people ask about 0 RBs, it's like, you can have your guys, but like you just said, getting a Chase Brown, how well would that have done for you? Getting a Bucky Irving, like you said, like you can still have your guys and go for them, but with those 0 RB builds, you, spreading it out. So you spread the love around.
And Jalen went ahead of all those guys.
Yeah,
so he was technically more
expensive.
Part. So I think that's the other thing you got to think through is like, hey, where's the most bang for your buck? Doesn't mean you don't ever draft Jaylen Warren, but there's some other guys that are pretty similar to him. And I kind of had a little bit of a take lock, to be honest, on Jaylen Warren.
It'll be interesting to see what they do with him too. Him and Najee Harris, really. Listen, the Steelers have a lot of questions that they have to go through. Justin Fields being one of them as well, seeing if they're going to bring him back as their quarterback. But yeah, that'll be a big one for running backs in fantasy football. The last lesson that you learned here this past season: don't fall in love with one player in a tier. Dwayne, we loved Rome Odunze though, so I really don't even want to go there. We love Rome Odunze, and it's fine. Everything's fine.
Yeah, I just kind of said that it's similar, right, to what we just talked about with Jaylen Warren, and thinking through the potential flags and things like that, and thinking about a tier and not just getting take lock. But I definitely did that with Rome Odunze. I didn't take enough Brian Thomas Jr., Kendall. So when you get take lock, not only could you miss on a player like Rome, it keeps you from taking the other player that went off, went nuclear in your fantasy playoffs and helps you win championships. And that was Brian Thomas Jr. Lab McConkey was another great example. Keon Coleman, an example of another guy that didn't hit. So we want to be drafting these rookie wide receivers, especially the guys going in round 1, early round 2, a lot of different names to mix in there. I think the other thing you can look at with Rome is we knew that talent competition was going to be tough, Kendall. You have Keenan Allen, who is coming off of a great year with the Chargers. We knew he would get to play the slot. And you also had DJ Moore. And those guys both had really good target shares this season. If you look at it, I know DJ Moore didn't finish great as a fantasy asset, but still, man, he had a 27% target share. You look at Keenan Allen, he was sitting there with a 27% target share. Rome Odunze, 19%, honestly, not bad, Kendall, when you're having to play with those other 2 guys. So I don't think it's time to give up on Rome, but that's not the lesson I was trying to go after here. My big mistake was continually drafting Rome Odunze rather than mixing in some more Lab McConkey, mixing in some more Brian Thomas Jr. That would have made my portfolio for fantasy football much more profitable, but instead I got too much of a take lock on a player in Odunze, even though Odunze was a little more expensive, but they were all pretty close in price.
Listen, you're not wrong. You're just a year early. That's what I'm going to say, Dwayne. And now they got Ben Johnson over there. You're not wrong. You're just a year early.
There's positives. Caleb's going to have to do his part, Kendall. Caleb's going to have to step up.
It'll be totally fine. And we'll continue rooting for our UW guy over there in Rome Odunze, who, again, you can see we did a video with him, top 5 wide receivers in the league, kept himself out of it. Just a humble guy. Yeah. So you're just a year early.
Yeah, super humble.
Super humble guy.
But Fantasy Life's own.
Oh, I like that. All right. Well, those were the lessons that you learned, what you got right. Like I said, way more than what you got wrong, Dwayne, but everyone can go and check those out at fantasylife.com. While you're there, make sure you go and subscribe to that newsletter. As always, 100% free. We appreciate you all hanging out with us today, and we'll see you here next time.